Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 5th of September. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that very easily, of course, by calling our free 1-800 number 472-0391. As you well know, that's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Available to you to access any of your local forecast information anytime you want. Keep the number handy, and as you're going through that menu that you hear on the phone, write the numbers down and you can get through it a little bit faster next time. Don't have to wait for the prompts there to guide you through. You can always check us out on the website, weather.gov/Alaska, of course, and on your phone or mobile device, mobile.weather.gov. Simply bookmark the page once you reach your village or your community's site there by typing that in the search bar at the top. Save that to your home screen on your mobile device, your phone, your tablet will work, and it's very low broadband or network reliable, so if you've got a poor signal or it's just not a very fast signal, certainly a very easy way to get weather information, as well as satellite radar links and a whole lot more. If you can't find what you're looking for, anything that has to do with the National Weather Service here in Alaska, I'm happy to help you any way I possibly can. It is a pleasure to talk to many of you on email sometimes and see some of your pictures. Let's take a look around the area today as we're looking at Iliamna. Here's a look to the east. You can see a lot of clouds here, and some of these wave clouds looks like we've got some turbulence up top, some waves forming off of some of the hills. As we look to the east there, temperatures around 61 degrees, certainly a mild day in Iliamna and many parts of southwest and south central Alaska with that broken to overcast kind of sky there, and certainly a signal that there's some fast moving winds moving over the region. Here's a look a little bit further north to Wales, a south view there. About 50 degrees up in Wales on the western end of the Seward Peninsula. You look out to the ocean and you can see kind of a bleak day it looks like. Things are damp. There's rain in the region, certainly up around Wales, and points to the south as we look out into the rain cloud, and a lot of that Pacific moisture streaming northward. And as you look out towards southeast and Sitka, you can see, well, things are still fairly dry there as far as the drought monitor goes. Conditions remain pretty tinderbox dry across south central and certainly southern parts of southeast. Levels here reaching into the severe to extreme drought categories from Petersburg all the way down to Ketchikan and Heidelberg there. North of that, we're still dealing with severe to moderate drought from northern and central parts of southeast. The brighter yellow colors here is kind of the beginning of the drought stage, abnormally dry conditions. You can see that covers up most of the Copper River Valley still, a large part of the upper Kuskokwim all the way up to McGrath down to Sleepmute. And then we get back into your darker orange colors, the moderate to severe conditions there across places like Kodiak and a large part of the Kenai Peninsula. And then we get back into the extreme drought from northern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, the Forelands, all the way up into the Anchorage area, Susitna Valley, all the way up to Talkeetna. And again, this is the wettest part of our year here when we start to get back into our fall storm system pattern. And despite the more cloudy and wetter conditions we've seen across a large part of the state, certainly the southern part of the state in recent weeks, it is still not improved conditions across the region. What we have in southeast is long-term drought, more than a year. And what we have in south central, southwest, and the Copper River Valley is a little bit more of a short-term issue, but still something that cannot be fixed just with 1, 2, or even 3 generally light rainfall events. As we look at fire danger, we can see the ongoing issue with drought that is affecting our fire weather season. Normally, we would say fire weather is pretty much done by this point, and it is not. Around the Copper River Valley, we'll be watching for gusty winds and dry air. We put those two together, and because of the lack of rainfall in the region, the fire conditions will still be very high to extreme in the area. Of course, this is a little bit of greater concern because a lot of you are going out to do some hunting in your favorite spots around southwest, south central, the Copper River Valley. And gosh, it sure is nice on a cold morning to have a campfire, is it? Well, you need to make sure, of course, that as you're flying out or if you're just driving along the road system, that you check in with the local fire managers and know the regulations about open fires in the area, because chances are there may be some restriction where you're going, and that is certainly true across the western Kenai Peninsula, the Anchorage area, and into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. Up to the north and west around the Kotzebue Sound region, there's still some high fire danger there. Not particularly worried about any wildfires spreading there, but by the numbers there, it does look like it is still fairly dry as of this 5th of September. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture now. You can see as the sun came up, we started out with some fog across northern parts of southeast, back into the Yakutat region and just outside of Prince William Sound. No reason we can't see that again tonight and into tomorrow. The chances are it won't be quite as dense as it was just the last few days or so, so maybe some good news there. Low pressure sitting well south of Sitka, a southerly flow blowing into the Dixon entrance in southern parts of southeast. We have a larger area of low pressure here across the central chain and across the southern Bering Sea. That low is pulling up a broad area of southerly winds across western Alaska. And this is really going to be our focus area for active weather in the next couple days here. Watch for turbulence. Probably pretty frequent, but generally light precipitation, rainfall there, not talking about snow or mixed frozen precipitation just yet. But as we go from about Kodiak all the way down toward, I'd say Sand Point or so, around this region, a lot of moisture is going to be gathering across the North Pacific and moving right into the Aleutian Chain and into Kodiak Island. So the potential is for some precipitation there to be on the moderate to maybe even occasionally heavy side. So if you're looking for rainfall, that would be my best bet. Out across the west, the moisture that you see across the southern Bering is not terribly stout or thick. Because of that, we're dealing mainly with just some changes in wind direction there, a little bit of a brief gusty wind passing through from time to time, but once again from Unalaska to Kodiak and northward, that's probably where we're talking about the greatest risk for considerable moderate there as we move into the weekend. The winds will be picking up from Bethel down to Dillingham to Kodiak and to Sand Point, and probably seeing some greater areas of turbulence as we go through the remainder of your weekend. Here's a look at the weather map now, and low pressure across the Chukchi Sea sits at 1,003 millibars, a stationary boundary here, and also to the west and southwest of St. Paul and St. George at 1,003 millibars. There, warm air is lifting northward. That is wringing out a lot of the moisture that we have across the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta into the Norton Sound region, Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound area. Places like Deering getting some beneficial rainfall there. And light rain falling from the central to eastern Aleutians all the way up towards Sand Point, Cold Bay, and False Pass, even King Cove. Back to the west, a little bit of light rain there with the next wave coming in behind it. And then low pressure across the eastern Gulf at 1,009 millibars, bringing in a little bit of a front coming to the north and to the east. That is bringing some cloud cover across southern parts of southeast, but really high pressure is in charge from British Columbia, southern Yukon, and all the way out into the Gulf at 1,025 millibars. That was responsible for our fog earlier this morning. As we go into tonight, high pressure will drift a little bit further northward and center up right around Prince William Sound, 1,022 millibars there. Certainly a pretty calm period for most of South Central. And this is effectively holding the air in place, allowing it to cool off with a clear sky overnight and allowing some fog to form. So we may have some areas of fog kind of in the usual spots again across northern parts of southeast, but as far as broad areas of dense fog, folks down in Juneau at the Weather Forecast Office say not really expecting that as much as we have seen in previous nights. Looking to the west, a broad southerly flow continues across western Alaska. Showers there around the Kobuk and Noatak areas. And as you get out into the Chukchi and the Kotzebue Sound region, pockets of rainfall and drizzle and certainly some areas of low visibility and fog. You'll see that in the aviation forecast here in just a minute. Out across the west, low pressure sitting south and west of St. Paul and St. George. And then to the west of that, northerly winds kick in. And when we look at the marine forecast in just a little while, you'll see this weather shift moving across the Aleutians, and this is why we're going to see that as that front gradually creeps into the Alaska Peninsula. With high pressure in place, we've got a lot of dry air across the Copper River Valley. Not a lot of wind yet, but certainly a lot of low humidity, and again, very stable air out across the Gulf. As we move into Friday, high pressure will sit pretty much in the same old spot. A low out here around St. Paul and St. George hovers around 996 millibars, and a front working across the Alaska Peninsula will keep that southerly flow working across the region. Watch for pockets of rain and drizzle to continue pretty much in the same old spots. We'll see some areas of fog and probably some poor visibility across the Chukchi coast with low pressure all the way out into the Bristol Bay region. Now, we'll also notice that this band of precipitation is starting to tighten up a little bit. And by the time we get back into Saturday, the front will be working its way across western Alaska, pushing inland a little bit closer to Lake Iliamna, some pockets of rainfall there. But notice that pressure pattern's kind of eased up across western Alaska. So the stronger winds that we see probably from Friday night into Saturday should ease up a little bit more as we get through your Saturday afternoon. Low pressure will move just to the west of Amonuk and Hooper Bay, holding around 998 millibars there. The front working its way up through the Seward Peninsula and pushing that warm and wet air even further north. High pressure holds across the north and eastern parts of the Gulf. We'll continue to see a very dry period here for southeast. And that's important because it looks like temperatures are going to be warming up, not just Friday, but on into Saturday, probably Sunday as well. Southern parts of southeast stand a chance of setting record high temperatures because of this weather pattern. So watch for more information from the weather forecast in Juneau. But if you're going to pick a day where it's going to be warm, it looks like Saturday for central, maybe even southern, certainly southern parts of southeast, record-setting heat possible for you. Low pressure out in the western Bering at 998 millibars, coming in right behind the next wave there. You can see high pressure across the western Gulf and the North Pacific, trying to keep everything pushing north. So eastern sections of Alaska, the interior, south central, really getting the dry part of this pattern for sure. Let's take a look at temperatures on Friday morning, 40s and 50s there. South central, you're looking at temps closer to 40 around the Talkeetna region as well as Anchorage. 30s for the upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon, 35 around Arctic Village, 30s and 40s for the Chukchi Coast, but certainly warmer as you head west. Coastal areas there holding around the lower 50s. Macquarie 51, 50 around St. Paul and St. George, and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. Highs on Friday, mid to upper 60s. In fact, Fairbanks could be looking at 68, breezy there. 60s and 70s for southeast, south central in the mid 60s, southwest, upper 50s, 54 Nome, 52 for Utqiagvik. For southeast, Saturday morning, watch this, lower 50s for southeast. Still pretty cool because of the dry weather here in the Copper River Valley and the upper Tanana. 36 around Arctic Village again, but closer to 50 for our western coastal villages. 48 around Savunga, 53 in Kodiak, 51 for Unalaska Dutch Harbor. Look at Saturday afternoon, a roast kind of day for southeast. Upper 60s and lower 70s for southeast, 71 in Fairbanks.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. IFR conditions should be expected across many of the west coast communities inside and outside of Kotzebue Sound, and right up until Kotzebue and just east of Shishmaref itself. You'll expect MVFR conditions there and up the Kuskokwim Delta and along the Alaska Range, parts of Prince William Sound and parts of the outer coast looking at MVFR. But IFR will be widespread across the Bering for St. Michael or St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George, and all the way through the Aleutian Chain pretty much up into just about Sand Point. Areas around southwest, around Lake Iliamna, Shelikof Strait and Kodiak Island, and Homer, all the way up into Clam Gulch and just about to Kenai. We'll be looking at IFR to start tomorrow. Just north of that boundary, we can expect VFR for many areas, including Anchorage and the southern Susitna Valley, all the way down to about Kenai and Soldotna itself. Areas around southeast should start out with VFR in the morning, so smooth sailing there. There may be some areas of fog, though. The last couple days we've started off the morning with fog. Dense fog advisories have been posted from the Weather Forecast Office in Juneau. Don't be surprised to see that again in a few places, as conditions won't have changed a whole lot just yet. By Friday afternoon, we expect to see marginal conditions across the Alaska Range higher terrain, as well as the Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and some areas on the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, but especially the lower terrain should be looking at least IFR conditions there. MVFR up until Adigan and AKwx Pass. Most of southeast remains at VFR through the afternoon on your Friday, with IFR lurking offshore for the North Slope. Most areas along the North Slope coast should be VFR, and we expect to see IFR conditions from St. Lawrence Island, Gamble, and Savunga included, and all the way through the central and eastern chain, and the Pribilofs still hovering at IFR conditions for Friday. For Saturday morning, look for IFR lurking again offshore and maybe just sneaking its way into Utqiagvik and around Wainwright, and then down into the Kotzebue Sound region, down into the Yukon Delta, and then once again into the lower terrain around the Kuskokwim Delta, the surrounding highlands, probably looking at marginal conditions there and into Lake Iliamna. IFR around Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and most of the central and western parts of the Bering, as well as the Gulf, with marginal conditions very near the outer coast of southeast, perhaps sneaking into the Dixon entrance a little bit and up toward Port Alexander, but Prince William Sound, Kenai Fjords, and really the southern parts of Cook Inlet all expected to be marginal through most of your Saturday morning. By the afternoon, you can see the IFR pulling out just a little bit more. Low ceiling and visibility expected for parts of the Bering Strait as well as St. Lawrence Island again, lingering around Wainwright and Utqiagvik. Eastward toward Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, Kaktovik, Atkasuk, and Nuiqsut, all looking to be VFR for the afternoon on Saturday. And then areas around the Alaska Range and southward into Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, and most of the Matanuska Valley and Copper River Valley, all looking to be VFR for your Saturday. Southeast also expected to be VFR with marginal, if not IFR conditions across Shelikof Strait and most of the Gulf for your afternoon there. Here are your pass conditions in detail. Then AKwx and Adigan Pass, a little bit different. It looks like AKwx may lean over toward IFR as we go throughout the day. Adigan probably holds at MVFR throughout most of your day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass probably push over toward IFR as we go through your Friday. Rainy Pass, marginal conditions there, and for Windy Pass as we wrap up the week. Isabel Pass, marginal conditions there. Mentasta Pass looks pretty good on Friday. VFR expected there. Dehne Pass probably looking at marginal conditions. Portage Pass, MVFR as we go, and Chilkoot and White Pass should be VFR. Again, watch out for some fog in the region. Freezing levels, you can see the line is kind of spread out quite a bit over what we've been dealing with the last couple of weeks. It looks like no major intrusion of cold air. There is some cooler weather up here across eastern parts of Asia, but the warmth is still holding onto the Gulf. Levels across the mainland stretch anywhere from 6 to 8, even 10,000 feet as you move into parts of southeast. Icing potential shows levels around 9 to 10,000 feet. No major or significant icing threat at lower levels where most of you folks are flying today and tomorrow. Isolated moderate is possible across the west, but again, you're going to have to get up above 10,000 feet to see that as a significant threat at this point. Here's a look at the jet, and this is why it's not a threat right now. The deep southerly flow coming off the Pacific has a lot of warm and wet air with it, so it is bringing in that warmth to the west coast where that icing could be possible. It is just not at this point. Low pressure sitting across the eastern Gulf. 60 knots coming into the southern parts of southeast, so things are staying fairly mild, and the main active weather will hold right over the west coast with southerly winds anywhere from 25 to about 50 knots across the west coast communities. Light winds across the central and eastern interior, 15 to 25 there, and light offshore winds blowing over southeast and westerlies coming in across the Aleutians. At 3,000 feet, you can see that east and southeasterly flow over the Gulf. Again, not a big change there. The fastest winds coming into the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay. Look for a blustery day as we head into Friday and Saturday, so if you've got some flying to do, plan on turbulence to get worse in the west. And watch for a brief ridge of high pressure across the central and western parts of the chain. So turbulence tomorrow, rough and tumble, considerable moderate across the west coast and the western Brooks Range, and it will probably get worse for Saturday.
Aquila the Eagle. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plow Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight. The Summer Triangle is riding high in the sky this week, and if you've watched our show over the years, you'll know that we often talk about two of its constellations, Cygnus the Swan and Lyra the Harp.
But there's a third constellation that we haven't really discussed in detail, and that's Aquila the Eagle.
That's right, Dean. So this week, we've decided to show Aquila some love and introduce you to the constellation that represents Zeus's pet eagle. Let's show you. Okay, we have our skies set up for an hour after sunset facing southeast. Looking high in the sky, we see the Summer Triangle. The three brightest stars are Vega, Altair, and Dehne. We're going to focus on Altair because that is the brightest star in the constellation Aquila the Eagle.
Aquila is best known as the pet eagle belonging to Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. Aquila had the job of holding Zeus's lightning bolts, but he was also known for kidnapping Ganymede and bringing him to Mount Olympus to be Zeus's divine drink server.
The brightest star in Aquila is Altair. Altair is 17 light years away from Earth and is one of the closest stars visible to the naked eye.
Altair has the rare distinction of being the fastest rotating star in our neighborhood. Our sun, for example, takes 25 days to spin once, but Altair spins once in only 9 hours. This has resulted in Altair being so distorted that it resembles an M&M. The semi-bright star above Altair is Terra Z. It's an orange giant star 460 light years from us and over 2,500 times as bright as our sun.
The semi-bright star below Altair is Alshane. It's a binary star system 45 light years from Earth. The primary star is a yellow subgiant only 30% more massive than our sun and 3 times the radius.
The smaller companion star is a red dwarf, only 1/3 the mass of our sun, with only 2% of our sun's luminosity. Talk about a tiny star.
You might be surprised to know that Aquila the Eagle has 143 stars that astronomers consider noteworthy. However, only a handful of them you can see from a light-polluted city.
Aquila is also one of those constellations where the Bayer designation gets a little weird. Developed by astronomer Johann Bayer, the Greek letter designation for stars most of the time was based on the star's brightness, alpha being the brightest, beta being the second brightest, and so on. Well, in Aquila, that's not the case.
The 7 brightest stars in order of brightness are Altair, which is alpha, Terra Z, which is gamma, Ocab is zeta, Almazan 3 is theta, Almazan 1 is delta, Alphalamane Prior is lambda, and lastly, Alshane is beta.
Weird.
Did you know that Aquila the Eagle that we recognize today is actually a combination of the original Aquila and a now obsolete constellation that was nearby?
That's right, James, like Boötes the herdsman that now includes the defunct constellation Quadrans Muralis. Aquila acquired the stars of the equally defunct constellation Antinous.
Antinous was created by the Roman Emperor Hadrian in 132 AD in honor of his youthful companion of the same name. As the centuries passed, Antinous was later demoted to an asterism within Aquila and eventually discarded when the International Astronomical Union formalized the constellations in 1930.
The stars Almazan 3, Almazan 2, and Alshane are where Antinous used to be. You can find them in the eastern portion of Aquila. So check out Aquila the Eagle and its many interesting stars tonight.
Wow, so many neat things to see when you remember to keep looking up.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your marine weather, and you'll notice that sea surface temperatures still appear very warm across the Gulf. We're looking at temperatures that are anywhere from about 15 degrees C or higher in some cases there, which is not very, very unusual, but it is warmer than normal. And if we could flip this over to a sea surface temperature anomaly page, it would show us that difference. I don't have that ready for you today, unfortunately, but what we're noticing there from some of those plots is that there is a new blob, they're calling it, across the Gulf of Alaska, stretching down to the Pacific Northwest, where another region of unusually warm water is still holding on from the summer months there. You can also see some warm water sitting off of Southwest and Norton Sound and certainly around the Chukchi coast, and cooler temperatures there across the northern seas, but for the most part they're not cold enough to freeze any ice just yet. Let's take a look at that, and you'll notice not a lot of change from yesterday. One thing to note, there is a little bit of marginal ice that has been sneaking into the Beaufort Gyre. This is moving south and west, but not forming in the water just yet, so don't get too excited there when you see that little patch there in the analyzed region. That analyzed area stops right about here too, so there's more ice out in here that we don't see on the map. This is available anytime at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice from the Alaska Sea Ice Program. With high pressure across the Gulf of Alaska right now, that is one of the reasons why we continue to see fairly mild weather and sea surface temperatures, but we're also getting light winds and small seas out of that, and areas of fog in the morning, of course. That will be back in a few places. Anywhere from about 10 knots and 2-foot seas for the inside, and for the outside, maybe winds up to 15 knots outside of the Dixon entrance with 5-foot seas there. Otherwise, conditions should be fairly light and pleasant as we go into Friday and again on Saturday. With this, we're also going to get a very mild couple days out of this. Saturday looks to be one of the warmest there, with potential for record heat across southern parts of Southeast, as we were talking about a little while ago. Otherwise, light winds and small seas continue. 5-foot seas on the outside and 2 to 3-foot seas on the inside at best. For Prince William Sound, you're looking at northwesterlies, 10 knots, 2 to 3-foot seas on the inside and outside. A little bit of a south and easterly flow coming across the western Barrens. That'll be one of the windier spots, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea there. Otherwise, 10 knots and 2-foot seas across Cook Inlet on Friday, and by Saturday you see a little bit more of a northerly push developing. The winds across the Barrens pick up a little bit more in response to low pressure out to our west at this point. North and easterlies coming across Prince William Sound, and easterly flow across the northern Gulf, 15 to 20, and 5 to 7-foot seas expected there on Saturday. For Bristol Bay, southeasterlies, 30 knots and 8-foot seas. Look for an 18-foot sea developing around Sandpoint and west to False Pass there as the winds come up sharply to 45 knots. Just to the north and east of that, up toward Akiak, winds will be around 30 knots with an 11-foot sea. Easterlies coming across Shelikof Strait will also be strengthening. 4-foot seas there, 5-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. You'll notice that kind of dampens out and stretches out a little bit more on Saturday. The stronger winds won't be as focused, but you can see they are shifting north and east, so we have a southwest flow coming in behind that front. 20 knots there with 8 to 10-foot seas, 6-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, 8-foot seas down toward Cold Bay, and south and easterly winds wrapping over Kodiak Island in the vicinity of the front, 20 to 25 knots and 6 to 10 foot seas there on Saturday. For the Aleutians, you'll be on the backside of this weather system all weekend long. So your weather should be improving. Westerlies coming across Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and Nikolsky, looking for 7 to 8 foot seas here across the Pacific waters, 4 to 6 foot seas from the Bering Sea coast, and then westward 6, maybe even 5 foot seas out to the west. You can see winds already wrapping in from the south and east into the next weather system out to the west, and here it comes. As this starts to track in across Kiska, you'll see a southerly flow to the east and a northeasterly flow on the western side of that low. Otherwise, it's southerly winds across the rest of the region. It will be breezy for Adak, Atka, Nikolsky, Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, but it looks like you will have some drier weather there to start the weekend. Look for a southeasterly flow through Macoriac and Eetolen Strait, 25 knots and 6 foot seas. Southerlies for Norton Sound, northwesterlies only 15 knots and 6 foot seas for St. Paul and St. George on Friday. Winds still holding around 20 to 30 knots in the entire west coast there, 25 knots for Norton Sound and a 5 foot sea on Saturday, 20 knots from the north around St. Matthew. And the Kuskokwim Delta looking at 25 knots with a 7 foot sea on Saturday. For the north slope, southeasterlies. For the Beaufort, 15 to 20, you're looking at 3 to 4 foot seas there, and 10 to 15 knot winds around the Chukchi with 3 to 4 foot seas as well on Friday. For Saturday, not much of a change, a little bit more of an offshore flow in all areas really, 10 to 15 knot winds, stronger around the Kotzebue Sound region, 20 knots with 4 foot seas there for you as you start your weekend. For most areas, the southerly winds across the west coast will really be the primary weather feature around Alaska as we go through the rest of the week. Considerable moderate turbulence will be a focus here, as well as widespread rain, heaviest of which and windiest of which will be just south of the Alaska Peninsula. High pressure in charge of the Gulf, keeping things hot and warm for parts of southeast to start the weekend.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.